Hello, this is Father Rich coming to you from the kitchen at the Our Lady of Peace Rectory for our next installment of how the church has changed the world. I'm here in front of our food pantry, so I don't think I've ever shared this with you before. Very exciting. And you might see the connection when you hear the title. The next essay we have is the Abbot and the Peas. So, yes, there are some fine canned, fresh cut sweet peas. One of my favorite vegetables. And who put that Browns napkin right next to it? Who knew, huh? Go Browns. This is our favorite time of year when the season hasn't started. Okay, so, but the abbot that they're speaking about is Gregor Mendel. But before we get to him, they talk about two different people in this essay. And the first one they actually start with is not the abbot and the peas, but another man, his contemporary, who was a naturalist in the 1800s. They both lived in the 1800s. And he was able to travel with many. He was from England, from the British boats, to travel around the world to observe different animals and plant species and accumulate a lot of information. He was kind of fairly well known during his time. The theories that he was proposing were called by others. He didn't use the term too often, but evolution. And this man was Charles Darwin. And the summary of his kind of life that the article suggests here. That scientist, Charles Darwin, once wrote that he had no use for poetry, that spiritual organ had dried up within him, along with his sense of the eternal. He wrote, remember, the origin of species, though he really denied that species as such exist, only a flux of states of being subject to continuous tiny changes. So the suggestion is that he pretty much proposed that your identity in the past was basically lost over generation to generation, and that everything was kind of in kind of a fluid motion, and there really was nothing that was constant. Everything changing, and that's philosophers have said that. I think it was Heraclitus that said that as well. That, you know, it's all changing like a river. But as opposed to that, they say Father Gregor Mendel was an abbot of an Augustinian monastery in the Czech Republic. And he didn't have all of this stuff available to him or travel. He basically just observed peas and grew peas. And over his observations, even as he was still an abbot, and at some point he had to let go of some of his scientific work because of the needs of his call to be abbot. But he slowly observed what we would understand to be genetics. He's called the father of modern genetics. He would call them markers, but eventually we would, as we know, call them genes. And he would say, he would figure out that there was a recessive gene. That even, and there, as we know it today, that even though there can be two opposing traits and a gene for each, and one is dominant, but the other one doesn't get lost, that it's always there. And that it's not just a matter of evolving, but it's a matter of these genes working together and which genes you have that show your characteristics. And yes, that certain characteristics, because they are advantageous, natural selection, as Darwin would talk about, that they might eventually become more predominant, but you still have that secret element of identity of who you were in the past in your genes. And so it's really a fascinating kind of, they were contemporaries, both lived in the 1800s, and certainly, obviously, Gregor Mendel, was liked poetry, believed in the divine, unlike Darwin, and kind of had a fuller sense of the purpose of life and being, and of the constant, which we would call the ultimate constant, being God. So this article, once again, this essay is reinforcing something we've heard in multiple essays, saying that the church is not against science, that the church has been the one to really advance science in so many ways, like Gregor Mendel. He kind of gives the example of that, like the example of Galileo I mentioned in another one of the videos, that everybody, all scientists especially, and the secularists, want to point to Galileo and say that's the example, the church not embracing science, kind of rejecting his theory of the sun being at the center of the solar system, and that's what the church does. But the essay here is saying, no, that's one example. He calls it a burr that gets in the coat of the dog and his hair, his fur. And, we've allowed that one burr to become the whole identity of the church and science. When we see all the other ways, and we've talked about it, the Big Bang Theory, we've talked about Mendel, we've talked about other Catholics that have, helped to move forward science and our understanding of the naturalism. And so, that we have to remember Gregor Mendel and that whole theory. He actually brings up several of those. He talks about Isaac Newton, John Dalton, and there was one other one I thought that was in here. But these different scientists that Gregor Mendel's a part of that have so much advanced things. So he concludes in saying, remember Father Mendel, dear readers, the next time you meet that shaggy dog, don't just remember the burr of Galileo, but all the ones that have helped keep that fur healthy, growing, and beautiful as it is. So we remember the Abbot and the peas. Go Browns. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day. God bless.